Okay, there we go. I'm going to kick off now. I've given everyone a minute to jump in. Hey, everybody, welcome to this latest MyHR Live event, webinar event. As I just said, I haven't done one of these for a while. I'm excited to sort of be back in the hot seat because this topic is something I'm particularly passionate about. Often, if you've attended my sessions before, you'll know I talk a lot about employment law and legislation, and it's an area of interest and skill of mine. But this is really about drawing on my journey at MyHR, starting a business 9 years ago with just myself and no other employees, and growing it today to nearly 60 people in 4 cities and 2 countries. So organisational design and getting the right org structure and getting the right roles and the right people in the right roles is critical. It's something I'm quite passionate about, and I can draw on some recent experience. The webinar was advertised to include my head of HR in Australia, Julian. Unfortunately, Julian is really unwell, such as the nature of kind of life at the moment. It's not COVID, so he has a super flu that is not at all related to COVID. It seems we are allowed to just get sick with other things still, which, yeah, no good for him, mate. So, Julian, if you are tuning in while you're recovering, then I hope you get well. I'm hoping to be joined by Greg Harrison, though, so I have brought in a very special guest. Greg is our partner manager for Australia. Greg has some considerable experience in this topic. And, oh, here we go. Greg's in. Hey, mate, how are you? Sorry, I couldn't see you here. And Greg, particularly, he really comes to us with quite an illustrious career, but the parts of his career that I'm really interested in are his time most recently helping businesses get started and launch in Australia, so their sort of startup and then growth phase into new export markets. And then prior to that was his time at Xero Australia, Xero, the accounting software firm, where he was the chief operations officer, and he took Xero from 50 employees to 500 employees. So some considerable experience, again, in the topic that we are talking about. So real world, real life experience. So as much as I am sad we don't have Julian, I'm delighted that we have Greg as a backup. So welcome, and thank you for joining us at short notice, mate. So let me jump into today's topic. And as always, when we do these things, I like to remind you, of course, that they are live. There is live Q&A. This is not scripted. We are happy to respond to questions on the fly. We may do that as we are talking, if it makes sense with the flow of the conversation. If not, we might come to the questions at the end and just wrap them up. So please do feel free to post questions. Also, this is being recorded, and so we will record it, wrap it up, and then make it available on all our normal channels on our website, myhr.works, through our social media, that's LinkedIn and Facebook, primarily there as well. So organisation design, let's dive into this, right? What is it, and why is this important? And why is this particularly an important topic for small and medium-sized enterprises? Simply put, org design is defining the structure of your organisation in terms of the jobs or the roles within it and the responsibilities that those jobs and roles have, right? It happens whether you put effort into it or not. Your organisation will design itself if you let it, by the simple nature of the fact you are recruiting people into jobs that you've found job descriptions for and you've hired them. So my view, strong view, is that don't let it happen to you. Take a proactive approach to this and think about it. And I encourage small and medium-sized businesses to do this. I genuinely believe it applies to businesses of all sizes. It's often something that's considered quite corporate. It's something that maybe people think about larger enterprises do, the traditional org chart with the boxes and the lines and the hierarchies and all of that sort of thing. So it certainly has this kind of corporate overtones, but don't be fooled by that, because I really believe that good org design and thinking about this will make the difference to small and medium businesses, no matter what stage or phase of life they are in. And I'll talk a bit to those details as well. And as I said, it's going to be happening anyway. So take a proactive approach, take an ownership role in your organisation and front foot this stuff. I think too, this is particularly important right now, as in Australia and New Zealand, we are in what is being dubbed a war for talent. We're in a candidate short market. We have limited flow on borders, so limited access to international resource. We have international companies poaching our good people. We are seeing that. We are seeing in Australia companies from the US, with Asia Pacific hubs coming in and hiring Australian people and allowing them to work remotely from Australia. I mean, in New Zealand, we are seeing Australian companies do the same with Kiwi workers. And so there's this cross-border management going on now, and we're in a fight for good talent. And I'm sure you're all aware of that. And so my reasons for saying that, this org design and good org design and good thinking applies to any size or any stage of business. I'll give you some examples as to why. A growth business, let's take that example. You need to be clear on what you will look like as you grow. You're 5 staff today, you're 10 tomorrow, then 20, then 50. Along that journey, you go from being a flat structure where the owner of the business knows everybody and they all report to her or him, to a business where, by the nature of that growth and the sheer fact that you cannot physically manage everybody yourself, you create a hierarchy. You have managers and people are outside your horizon in terms of your day-to-day visibility of what they do and how effective they are. So whether that growth comes through investment, say in the example of tech companies getting a capital injection and then trying to expand into new markets, or whether that's just through high market demand, like construction firms at the moment. Construction boom going on. You talk to any trades company, I'm sure they will tell you that they have more staff than they've had and they wish they could get more, and they're fighting to get more because the work pipeline is so great. If only they could get product in to keep up with the pace of building. So growth comes through a number of ways, whether it's investment or market growth. As your organisation grows, hierarchies appear and you need to be in control of that. But even a stable, smaller business, it might just seem obvious that you go, well, we're a cafe, we need a barista and a front of house chef. But again, we're fighting for talent in a really candidate type market, and the type of organisation or the type of cafe you want to be, or the type of small trades company you want to be, or the type of small tech firm or support professional services company you want to be, will define the way you can think about structuring your organisation. And it helps you box clever when you're up against the large corporates. And by that I mean what you outsource, what you contract, and who you employ. And your org structure includes all of those in a way that corporates don't quite. They sort of think in terms of that employee hierarchy. So good thinking in this space, even if you are a stable run and maintain style business, will help you compete in a good market and help you protect your business against competition and headwinds. And then another example is the not-for-profit sector. So we work with a lot of not-for-profits, and these are organisations that are made up of employees, of contractors, and of volunteers. And there's some really interesting case law currently in New Zealand around the use of volunteers, and there will be more to come on this topic. But similarly in Australia, this is a tightly managed area, and you have very clear community outcomes in the not-for-profit sector, and those outcomes are managed and need to be able to survive under scrutiny, because your sponsors, your donors, the people who donate money to the charity, the community that receive the benefits of the charity want to see this happening. And so you're under a lot of scrutiny, and organisational design is critically important in a world where you have tight resources and limited budget, and you rely on the goodwill of volunteers, but you don't want to breach employment law. You need to maintain good outcomes. So across all those sectors, high growth, run and maintain, not-for-profit, good org design is important in my view. The other time that it is critically important, and as you know, anyone who's seen me speak before, I've sort of come from the background of large volume employment and industrial relations, both here and in Australia. I managed large restructures, disputes, union negotiations, that's sort of my background. Good org design at a time of restructure is critical, because the way you restructure an organisation to set yourself up for future success when you are responding perhaps to negative market forces is really, really important, because fundamentally you're now deciding not who are we hiring from the external market, but who are we letting go from our existing team. So there's the who goes and who stays question, and then there's the how you handle it. And that is critically important because that affects the culture of the business ongoing, and it affects the kind of trust that your remaining employees will have for you. So designing the organisation properly at that point, when you then engage in consultation around restructure, is critically important. So org design has its place in any size business at any time. there are those examples. I have a very simple formula that I like to apply and that I share with business owners all the time around how to effectively do this. Because what is it? When you sit with a blank piece of paper and start with the squares on the page, it's pretty straightforward. Start with your strategy. What is the company's or the organisation's strategy? And again, it doesn't have to be take over the world and become a massive multinational. It can be just be the best cafe in my local suburb. But whatever the plan is for the company or the organisation, whatever that strategy is, that then defines a bunch of work that needs to be done, how you go about doing what you need to do. That catalogue of work is what you can then use to define the specific jobs that you need and how they fit into your organisation. So the strategy defines the work that is needed to be done, which defines the jobs that you need. And this is often the reverse of how we think about it. Normally we go into this sort of one foot in front of the other, and we're growing, so we need to hire. So you download a job description from Google and you go, great, I'm going to go hire a salesperson and this is what the job is. And then from there, you kind of fit them into the organisation and then hope they deliver on the strategy. Similarly, I see this often with restructures. Okay, we need to kind of move these people in these roles on, and then we're going to do this over here. And we create this job and we redeploy people here. We make these folks redundant, and then we hope that these people in these new jobs will do this work and deliver to this strategy. That's the wrong way around. Think in terms of the top down, your strategy first, and your strategy then defines that full catalogue of work, and you can start getting creative again in a candidate type market around how do we deliver these. One of the things that I often end up advising is companies, particularly in the tech sector, who get large investments. They've suddenly gone from a steady and healthy revenue stream to a large capital injection of often millions of dollars. And with that comes an expectation from investors that you will grow. And so often growth then comes through, okay, great, let's start by hiring 10 new salespeople. We need 10 business development managers in Melbourne, Adelaide, Perth, Brisbane, because we need to expand our footprint beyond Sydney. And we're going to put 4 in Auckland, New Zealand, and we're going to grow there as well. And so you have this kind of just chuck people at the problem and grow because we have the cash to do that. If you stop and pause and think about what that expansion strategy looks like, how big you want to be in terms of your revenue, how you service the customers, the size of customers you go after, where those customers look for you. And you're really clear on the strategy of your organisation overall, and then the strategy of deploying that capital. You might go, heck, we don't need 10 or 20 new business development managers who are going to end up tripping over themselves and fighting for the same accounts and really not deliver the growth outcomes we want. You might be better served having 2 or 3 very good business development managers supported by a team of SDRs, sales development representatives, maybe some marketing, good copywriting, build a content strategy, and feed a sales funnel, qualify leads that then allow a smaller number of good salespeople to convert those leads into business. And that is a really simple example of basic org design. And taking the approach of think about strategy and the outcome, look at the work that needs to be done, and then allocate that work to the jobs, versus just going and tripling or doubling or quadrupling your team. So getting it wrong will set you back, right? And it's a complicated thing to unpick if you get this wrong, because you'll often end up calling organisations like ours or me and you ask for some help, and the conversation goes a little bit like this. Look, Jason's great at the job he's doing. It's just not the right job. He's sort of a square peg in a round hole. And so we can't really performance manage him on the basis that he's not really underperforming. He's just not really doing work that is driving and delivering to the strategy. And this creates real problems when you try and then performance manage somebody. You then have to look at restructure. The time that wastes and the negative impact on trying to achieve your growth outcomes or your business outcomes is significant. You compound that now with the fact we're in this candidate type market, right? Hunting for new people or hiring someone who doesn't work out and having to go back to market, this is just delay on delay on delay. Also engaging in this market. And this is not the silver bullet for finding candidates. I get it. We're all in this time at the moment. Everyone's placing ads, and I'm hearing from a lot of our clients about, where we used to get 50 candidates 3 years ago, we're getting 5 now, and none of them are even qualified for the job we've advertised. So I get that. But what will help you in this market is being really clear that when you post that job and when you go hunting for that job, that you know absolutely what they need to do, and that when you find that right person, it becomes really clear. And that, by that I mean too, you're clear on the non-negotiables and the negotiable areas. The skills that people are nice to have, or the experience it's nice to have but you don't need, the things you must have. Because when you know those must-haves, and you know that that will deliver the work you need, which will in turn help you meet your strategic outcomes, then you're in really good shape to make good, clear decisions on you know, the person you hire, and then how you manage them once they've hired. So there's my download to sort of kick this session off around why I think this applies to all of us in the small and medium enterprise space, what good looks like in my view. It's not the only view, and that's why I'm stoked to have Greg here, because he has some stuff to share with us as well. And then, you know, some tips maybe on how to do it. What I'd like to do now is, I have a couple of questions for Greg. I thought I'd just warm him up with some questions, interview style, and draw on his experience, particularly at Xero, you know, growing, and then more broadly in other roles, and then hand to him to have a bit of a chat about this. So, Greg, are you all good for that? My first question, let's see how this goes. What I'm interested to hear from Greg is that staff growth journey at Xero. I mean, that's massive growth, right? You're effectively going, awesome, great. Okay, Greg's logging out and coming back in. I will just chat while we wait for Greg to do that. And I can sort of pick up on some of the things. So really what I want Greg to define for us is, you know, how his real experience, what I've experienced, I described this at the start of the session, is our growth from sort of 0 to 55. And as many of you know, I came from a corporate background where we sort of did all design and big restructures as a matter of course. It may surprise you somewhat stupidly that I did not initially do this all that effectively, right? So, and it's because as a business owner, you get caught up in the day-to-day. So we just grew organically, and growth was great, and business was booming, and we were excited. So we hired and we hired and we hired. And it was probably at about that 5-year mark that I stopped and went, heck, hang on, if this carries on, we're going to, you know, the wheels will start to come off. And that moment of stop, pause, align the organisation we were building to the strategy that we had, and completely turned everything on its head. And so for the last 4 years, we've been much, much better at this. So certainly nobody's perfect, and I'm far from it. But I, having left the corporate world and come into small business and then growing a business, I'm definitely guilty of it. So the trick is just making sure, and I know this is hard, and we're all flat out, but making sure you kind of make that time for that moment. If you have a board, or if you have a business mentor, or if you take time every month to stop and think about things in your business, the old adage of working on your business, not in your business, I would encourage you to build time into it for org design. And this often doesn't happen. And this is not a criticism of the small business advisory sector, but often small business advisors will help you look at maybe capital structure, or look at the financial structure of your business, will help you look at markets and growth and marketing strategies and those sorts of things. But organisation design, like a lot of the sort of HR things, is not covered or is forgotten. So I would encourage you, if you take any time to work on your business, to build org design into the process, so you can so you don't get caught up in getting it wrong, kind of like I did. So I don't know where Greg's at. So what I'm going to do is carry on with my sort of piece, and then see if we can get him back, and then open up the line to questions from everybody. So I want to talk a little bit about the nature of org design in terms of specific roles in SME or small medium enterprises, right? And so this is, I referred to it a bit earlier and was intending to come back to it after Greg's piece. And this is how you think about the role. So it's not always necessarily full-time employees or full-time or part-time employees who are on your payroll. It's the use of contractors, it's the use of outsourcing companies, it's the use of sometimes better technology. I mean, this can happen in all sorts of ways. I mean, for pretty much all of us, our accountant is a perfect example of an outsourced provider, right? We don't have the size of company to justify an in-house finance team. We might get to a size where we have CFO or somebody sort of overseeing that, or we might have an accounts administrator who helps us with payables and receivables, but a vast chunk of the finance work is done by the accountant in terms of tax compliance, GST, etc. Similarly with what we do. And this is the basis, and this is sounding like a shameless plug, but for the benefit of this, whether it's MyHR or whether it's another HR provider, at this point I don't mind. I'm giving you good advice about what you should be doing and what you should be outsourcing. You don't need an HR department. You can't justify an HR department. We built MyHR on this basis, that with the software and the human piece combined, we can provide the support and guidance that you need to get your business through tricky employment issues, to be a better employer and to be proactive. Marketing, web design, development, that sort of thing. Again, easy options to outsource. The use of contractors, just be careful about this. There's another webinar on this topic. Contractors who otherwise are employees, that's something, sham contracts will come under scrutiny, and they will come under scrutiny at a time of dispute. And you do not want that a sham contract to have been found to, in fact, be an employment relationship. But used correctly, contractors, independent contractors are ideal because you have this ability to flex up and flex down. So if I use the example of our software development team, we have a mix of an outsourced, very reputable provider who works with Amazon Web Services to run what we call DevOps. We have an in-house team of employees who we value and we want to be our employees because we want them connected to the design and development of our software. And we have a supplementary team of contractors who are awesome, but they're very mercenary, and that's their nature. And we love it and they love it. We call them when we need them, they'll fly in, they'll give us 80 hours, they might disappear. They might give us a month and then they may disappear for 6 months. And so that ability to flex our software dev structure and org structure around that is critical. Defining that is the strategy we have for our software development. Without that, oh mate, you made it. Go, Greg.
Oh. Thank you.
I hear you've travelled from Australia to New Zealand, so maybe they just didn't recognise your IP address or your login, mate. They're going, what's this guy doing here? How did he get in?
Something like that. Look, sorry for the delay, folks, but I'm here now and keen to chat. So, Jason, do we want to sort of go back to those questions?
I'm keen to ask the questions. I was sort of saying I wanted to go, and I've jumped ahead into some stuff that might then loop back, but I was just describing as you were logging in, as the example that I wanted to give was the way we structured our software dev team, which is this combination of an outsourced provider managing our DevOps and Amazon Web Services work, our in-house team of employees, and then the team of independent contractors that sort of fly in and fly out. And we got to that structure by being really clear on our software development strategy. And so without that kind of top-down consideration, especially in software development, anyone who's done it or tried it will know this, you just can become scattered and directionless really quickly, for the simple reason that there is always more to do than you can reasonably do, and everybody has an idea. And so you've got a million things on the list about what your software could do, feedback from customers, feedback from team, and if you don't have a clear strategy on what you want to be delivering, you can't then define the catalogue of work that needs to happen. And this is strategy defines work, defines the jobs. And so that I was just providing an example. We don't need to come back to that now. I can go back to the questions. So I'm pretty keen, mate, to hear from you, and I think our audience will be too. I've framed some questions just around your time at Xero, but could also be around your time, consulting and account managing export businesses and startups. Could be anything, but particularly the Xero journey, 50 to 500, that's massive. You're sort of going from a small, I think when they landed, they maybe had 4 staff, and then suddenly it was 40, and then suddenly it was 50. And you're going from probably small to medium to a corporate size organization. I'd like to hear what mistakes you made and what went. So some war stories, the good and the bad, and any tips that then flow out of that.
Yeah, look, I think thanks for the question, for the opportunity. And I think there's lots of good things that happen and lots of difficult things that happen. And I'd probably start with that, is for anybody looking at growth, is that journey is hard. So I just fess up on day one that there's a lot of moving parts, and people are probably the most complex part of any organisation. I'd also really endorse the perspective of start with a strategy in mind and work backwards. So one of the things I think we were very, very clear on is the customer journey informs the business informs the structure, and the process. And we were very clear very early on is that, having people understand their roles will change. The last thing you want to do is design an organisation or a process around the resource you have that's working forwards, and that bakes in limitations and it puts people in roles that don't necessarily fit. So design from the end point backwards. Yeah. So one of the things that worked really, really well was a very heavy footprint of the MD in Australia, Chris Reed, in interviews. So I probably tapped out in the early 200s work-wise. So that was two years. And Chris in that time would have probably interviewed at least 95% of the people that came in through the front doors. Now, he wasn't the sole interview, but he was making sure in his role as guardian of the culture that you restrict the opportunity for not the right people to join. So I think for the leaders out there, it's one of your key roles, I think, is to make sure that you guard the culture and probably look at culture a bit differently. Often we look for cultural fit, and I think that's a good foundation, but also look for people who will add to the culture. So high involvement with the management team. I sat in many, many interviews with Chris, riding shotgun for him. So it's one of those things, the more eyes you have on potential staff, the better. And yes, it takes a little longer, but what that meant for us as a business is that our rejection rate or our flush rate was really quite low. And when you do have issues, act very, very quickly. So hire slowly, fire or redeploy fast is the key thing.
No, that's gold, I think, actually. And look, what I find, and for the audience, this is something often business owners, and I'm guilty of it myself, be like, that's just nuts, I don't have time, it's an interview. And you don't have to be there for the full hour of the interview. You can dedicate your time to the first half or the first quarter if you're really stretched. But the value in getting this right and is so significant in terms of avoiding downstream pain. Because if you get it wrong, the time taken to manage out and then deal with the consequences of a really poor hire, that time is far more significant than taking 30 minutes out of your day to interview a couple of candidates, So it is time saved downstream, and it's better outcomes across the board. So
look, it is, and probably the other end of that is that when there's a bad fit or a poor performer in the team, everybody knows. And the longer you delay taking action, the more it undermines the management team and undermines the culture. So you have to act fast. And that doesn't mean that you act harshly or unfairly, but you need to address performance issues, cultural issues really quick. Mm-hmm. So that'd be another point I think that we did really well, Jason, is that we over-communicated. Here's the strategy, here's the goals, here's how we're tracking, here's our expectations. And again, it doesn't need 3 hours a week to do this, but the constant pressing of reinforcing of the key things is here's why we're in business, here's what we're trying to achieve, here's where you fit. So over-communicate, I think, was another good one.
Yep. Thank you. And look, again, sort of critical stuff. So what I'm hearing is we've got this, from good org design comes the ability to make good decisions, right? So kind of linking that back. So this ability to, when you say take the time to hire, and so hire slow and fire fast or redeploy fast, that is made so much easier when you are clear what you do and don't need, and you can communicate that clearly. And so for somebody like me who is in the employment law space and who's engaged, or my team are engaged in helping them make those exits happen, it is much easier for us, and it is far lower risk for you when the expectations are clear and we can clearly demonstrate that they weren't met. And that, while that just sounds like best practice performance management, best practice performance management comes out of best practice organisational design, because it's a clarity of purpose, which defines a clarity of delivery and a clarity of jobs. And the person who's not achieving that stuff can be very quickly laid alongside it, and we can very quickly explain in a professional and courteous way that they're not a fit for this organisation because they're not achieving what we want them to do. Versus that situation I was describing earlier, where in fact we've hired a business development manager, and what we really needed was probably a sales development representative. And so we have a person who's too senior, who's too strategic, who's doing too much business development when we just need someone who's prepared to make 100 calls a day every day of the week. It's not their fault. They've been hired into the wrong job. That's not a performance management issue. That's a poor org design issue. And for people like me, it makes it quite difficult for us to help you manage that. It defaults often back to a restructure. But let me tell you, restructures that occur too frequently, too early in the employment relationship, can be very damaging for the organisation culture. Because people are like, oh, heck, Jason only just started and now he's being made redundant. What's going on here? Can I trust my boss? Is my job safe? Is this a place I really want to stick with? Because I have a mortgage, I have kids, I need to know my position's secure. So this tactical kind of outcome is improved vastly by that quality of org design. So yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And that also really flows down all, and particularly in fast-growing organisations, people have to let go of stuff fairly quickly. The role started this wide and it narrows down. So helping people understand that that's a necessary thing for the business. But also you see this on the rugby field. There's, show me the last time a fly half was in a line-out. People have defined roles, and as a functional, healthy team, we need to respect what other people do. We need to trust in their capability, and we need to let them do their job without our special help. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So clarity of role, but that really speaks to the fabric of the culture as well. Guys, we need to trust each other, and here's what that looks like. So provide lots of examples of what is the cultural statement. Great. What does that mean for me today?
Yeah, nice. So what do you say then to smaller companies? Because I think the Xero example is great, but for many of our audience, we're sort of operating maybe 8, 10, 12 staff or 30 staff. 500 or 250 even it seems out of reach, and it's not something that they're necessarily striving for. So when you think about smaller businesses, and you've advised many smaller businesses, that would come to you and say, this just seems like a bit of over-engineering. I know what I want. I need a salesperson. I need a software developer. I need this. Don't waste my time with all this fluff. How would you frame that? How would you tackle that?
Yeah, look, it's often a fair question. I'd say that the principles are uniform. How you apply those principles in your business will vary size to size. But the fundamentals of you need to design your business around how it will impact the business's ability to operate and execute and serve customers. It's really important. And I saw this a few times in working with New Zealand companies coming into Australia. Don't hire your brother who lives in Brisbane. That's a really bad idea. Go and hire a professional. So know what the market pays and pay it. That's a really key issue. And look, there's no getting away from the fact that salespeople in Australia, regardless of what the industry or the sector is, they're more expensive. But my argument is if your business plan falls apart because of $40,000 worth of salary, then something's wrong with the business plan. Yep. So in some senses, the smaller, the more important it is, because you're going to be having people who are doing multiple roles. Mm-hmm. So the clarity of how they fit in, where they can move the needle, how they affect customers is even more important, because there's a lot less stretch in the fabric. So alignment is really important, because 5 degrees off in a big company is one thing, 5 degrees off in a small company is a huge amount.
Yeah, totally right. And that's that proportional thing, right? Like one person in a 5-person business makes up 20% of the workforce, right? So, yeah. Really interesting when you talk about that export or that international play. And what I find is when organisations think about maybe leaving Australia to go to the US or to Europe or across to New Zealand, or when New Zealand companies think about moving into Australia, this is a moment where good org design can make such a massive impact, because replicating a business structure is seldom the right thing to do. You don't need the same structure, but being able to define what you can do cross-border, what you need in-market versus what you can do from your home country is really important. And it's often done wrong. Things that are kept in the home country that should be on the ground, create real issues. And putting resource on the ground that is unsupported, alone, and not really structured in terms of outcomes is also fraught. So defining a structure that allows that export strategy to work is critical. And again, coming back to my earlier point, we don't do everything in-house in smaller businesses. So who are you using outsourced in market for, whether it's distribution of product, whether it's marketing and public relations, whether it's some form of professional services and support, versus the team you have on the ground. And again, org design here is critical. And so, yeah, look, I agree. And whether you're 5 people, 50 people, 15 people, it makes sense to get this right.
It does. And the other part of that is extending that comment is you've got to go and get external expertise. So if you want to start suddenly trading in a different country, understand the tax implications both domestically and offshore. And if you're hiring people, engage someone like MyHR to say, well, how do I, more than just how do I mitigate my risk, how do I set up a set of processes that will help the person land and be managed well? So, don't try and think you can do this all yourself. Call on expertise, engage the experts, and that will give you a much better chance of success, yeah?
Yeah, totally agree. But when you're then doing your due diligence on those exits, being really clear on what you're trying to achieve will help, because everyone wants to tell you something. So you're going to get your marketing experts, you're going to get your systems experts, process experts, you're going to get people going, I'm a business networking guru, pay me $5,000 a month and I'll connect you to... Everyone wants to sell you something. And so you need expert help, but you need to make sure you get the right expert help instead of burning cash on just on a flashy salesperson who's sold you a dream and then doesn't deliver on that. And so everything we're talking about, folks, is what organisational design is. And so when we put this topic up, and I wondered with small and medium businesses and our client base if this was kind of relevant, and I think this is the relevance of it. These things that you probably do either very well or in somewhat piecemeal at the moment, they all fit under this category of organisational design. So don't fall into the trap of thinking this is a corporate-only thing. These decisions and this way of thinking about org design and this top-down approach will deliver genuinely good business outcomes for small and medium enterprises. Cool, mate. Thank you for that. We've got a question in. So where we're at now, I like to try and keep these sort of within 45 minutes just because everyone's very busy. We've got the recording and the playback. Beyond that, people start to fall asleep. YouTube inserts ads in the middle of it. So we don't want to rabbit on for too long. I'll do a quick wrap and then we'll jump into the question. And then if any more questions come in or you have anything, please do pop them up. We will answer them live right now. So I guess in terms of a wrap, fundamentally getting the right people in your business is critical to your success, right? I don't think anybody disagrees with that. But who the right person is with their skills, experience, background, etc., will depend entirely on the work that needs to be done. And that the work that needs to be done to achieve the outcomes that the organisation has defined, the strategic outcomes. And so instead of thinking about hiring based on a job description of what I think I need, then slotting them into my business and then hoping that delivers somehow to my strategy, flip that model to be top down. The strategy defines the work that needs to be done, which defines the roles within your organisation. And you apply that whether you're in a growth mode, whether you are run and maintain, or whether you are in a downsize and restructure mode. And it will really help you in terms of getting the right job definition, which helps you find the right person in a tight candidate market and make decisions around in-house versus outsourcing. So that's our kind of wrap in terms of summary of our views and advice. The question here, I'll just read the whole thing. Sorry, coming late to the session. I agree with defining strategy, define the work to be done, and defining the people we need. However, the challenge is finding the people to meet the criteria. Yeah. New Zealand is up against the potential brain drain, like two countries like Australia that are making attractive offers, which Kiwi companies are struggling. Can I say too, in Australia, we are seeing the same thing. A similar conversation is happening there about good quality Aussie employees being enticed by cashed up European and American employers. And sometimes it's an offer to relocate and go and have a great overseas experience and get paid well while you're doing it. Other times it is organisations being prepared to keep people local and go, look, you've been working from home for the last 2 years, stick with your home office in Sydney, but work for us in San Francisco. So it's not just, it's a New Zealand, Australia thing. But this question goes to New Zealand is struggling as we're coming off border closure in an extremely tight labour market with huge financial constraints. Any suggestions? Yeah, great question. I wish I had one suggestion that would just solve this problem for you. We're up against some things, when I say we, I'm talking about everyone here and in business in general in New Zealand and Australia. We're up against some things that are outside of our control. So a lack of immigration flow due to border closures and a slower restart. Even though borders are now somewhat open, people are not flocking back to New Zealand and Australia like we thought they might. Immigration numbers, particularly in New Zealand, are down. Net migration is negative. So nothing we do at the moment is going to change that. So that's the context in which we have to work. What you can do is deploy a kind of multifaceted strategy to mitigate this stuff. So it starts with being clear on what you want. Then once you define what you want, it's figuring out how you go to market to hunt that down. And so whether that is traditional advertising, Seek, Trade Me, etc., industry magazines, whether it's the use of recruitment consultants to help you. Getting creative with the way you think about resourcing if you can. So I acknowledge if you need someone on the tools, you can't hire a remote worker, but for any work that can be done remotely, think about hiring offshore. You can do the same thing that Australia is doing to New Zealand, or that Europe is doing to Australia, and that is thinking about people in other countries or in different time zones to do some of this work. In New Zealand, particularly in response to this question, we've got some changes to immigration law coming. They're well announced and well signalled. So if you can't get talent locally, my advice now would be prep for that. Get your accreditation lined up, be ready, so that when borders open, you can start engaging an international labour force, because if you need to hire tradespeople or people who need to be on the ground in your business and can't work remotely, you want to be ready for that when that happens. So deploying kind of multi-strategy like this, looking at temp labour wherever you can, if that's possible, all of these things sort of added up. Sometimes in smaller companies, business owners I'm talking to are saying, well, I'm getting back on the tools because they just have to. There's that much work, and they've sort of they've drifted away from it, but now they're coming back and they're outsourcing some of the business admin and quoting type work that they were previously doing. So a number of different ways. Sorry, no kind of silver bullet. But I hope that helped. Greg, do you have anything you'd like to add to that, or have I sort of rabbited on too long?
I think you've covered it well, but the bottom line is just be able to look yourself in the mirror and say, look, this is hard, and it is hard. There are no silver bullets. So it's not a matter of have you thought about the right things to do. It's just genuinely a really tough place. So the more elastic you think about the problem to solve, and it's probably a good example of working backwards again, how else could I solve this problem?
Yep. Nice one. Another question, this one from Lucy, saying, how often should we review the organisation design, i.e. quarterly? Yeah, really good question. Greg and I might have different views on this, so I'm quite keen to I'll hear what you say, Greg, and then I'll share my views, and hopefully we can give Lucy and the rest of the folks some clear guidance. What do you think?
Sure. Look, I think your basic strategic plan should be written in pencil, so it should be relatively flexible in terms of how we're going to operationalise the business this year. I think it should be something like a quarterly business review, and against those QBRs, then you start to look at, do we need to change an aspect of what we're doing? I generally avoid doing lots of organisational changes because it can be very unsettling for people. And if you have to do an organisational change 2 or 3 times in the year, you've probably got something fundamentally wrong anyway. So I think your design needs to be flexible enough, and your people need to be flexible enough, and the expectation needs to be flexible enough to have a little bit of wiggle room in there. But if you're planning for less than a 12-month cycle, you'd be a fairly unusual business, but sort of check in against that as you go. Yeah.
Perfect, mate. We agree. How about that? I thought, this could be a moment where the panelists have a bit of a debate. But no, Lucy, I'm 100% with Greg. I think quarterly is way too regular for organisational review. Have a regular cadence around your strategy review. You'll probably have your monthly accounts, your quarterly check-in. There's maybe a board meeting cycle where you meet and talk about how the business is going in general, revenue targets, growth, market, recruitment, whatever else. But a review of your org structure, yeah, it's a kind of annual check-in. The other thing is be flexible to trigger a review when it's right. So it may be, if I go back to my example of a tech startup, you get some capital. So, okay, we had a structure, we did some great work on it, we're pretty clear on it, and then all of a sudden we decided to raise capital, and 6 months later we've got $10 million in the bank, and our investors have said, we want you to launch in Singapore. That is a moment where you need to pause and do your org design again. To Greg's point though, around regular org reviews and change, I could not agree more. Like this is gold advice. I've seen large companies both in Australia and New Zealand guilty of this, where they sort of manage by restructure, and it is a culture killer. And that, a department gets built, there's great fanfare about the new thing they're going to deliver for the large corporate that they are in, or the large government entity. They're also guilty of this. 6 months in, it's not working, they restructure everybody. They set a new team up, and then they restructure again in 6 months. It's just an awful place to be. Nobody really feels safe. And what happens is org design and org and restructure becomes this kind of weird proxy for performance management, and I say that it's performance managers of the exec team who have failed to clearly define a decent execution strategy for whatever they were planning to achieve, and so we just kind of lay everybody off and recruit a new bunch or redeploy people to a new department. Awful. And for anyone who's worked in a business or an organisation like this, they understand what I mean. It's incredibly unsettling. So Lucy, hopefully that's clear. Check in on every month and every year, and any trigger events along the way. Great questions, team. Thank you. All right. Look, we're just over 45 minutes. We account for a bit of technical problem in the middle of this. Sorry about that, folks, and thank you for bearing with us. I hope this was a useful topic. As always, I always like to wrap this by saying, if you still have questions after the event, get in touch. We communicate often. I'm on LinkedIn. Ping me a question. I'm happy to have a chat. I'm happy to have a public chat if you want to engage the audience. Let me know. We're here. It will be, as I said, it's being recorded, and it will be placed on our website and LinkedIn and Facebook, so you can watch this back. But yeah, thank you so much. Lovely to connect with you all and be back in this seat again. And thank you so much, Greg, at short notice for jumping in and helping out. I think it was some gold.
You're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah,
Cheers.
No worries. Okay, everybody, take care. We'll see you later.